This press conference from February 16th, 2022 is on Operation Hug a Trucker. And this is Roy, the executive director of TBOF, Taking Back Our Freedoms. This is Jeff, the operations coordinator. And these are military veterans in the back. This gentleman, Edward Cornell, is part of Police on Guard for Thee, which is an organization I've called out in Policing for Freedom, Part 1. And Dana, I'm not sure what her overall role is in the grand scheme of things, but I know she's a speaker that gives horrific advice, which I'll get to eventually. Now, the executive director of TBOF, Roy, goes on to say that maximum pressure needs to be applied to politicians in order to end the mandates, and that the legislation introduced by the Prime Minister is a serious threat to our democracy and encourages reaching out to your MP and the senators to hear your concerns. And he also goes on to say that the threat we face is a loss of democracy from within. Now, he introduces Roy, the operations coordinator, who mentions that it's his job to keep people fed, warm, happy, and safe. And an interesting quote of his, he says, "And we can all get back to where we need to be, where we want to be, and where we never should have left." Which instills the idea that the system was not oppressive at all prior to this tyranny, and I'm gonna explain why when I give CAS as an example, and show you that your supposed charter rights mean absolutely nothing when the Emergencies Act has been brought forth. But I'm going to give some real practical advice in this video and not just leave fear porn in the air, because that's Rebel News' job. So Roy comes back and he ends up mentioning legal counsel for the Convoy is Keith Wilson of JCCF. I mentioned him in the previous trucker video and showed him. He mentions that Keith Wilson, along with Chris, did a talk about the legislation the Prime Minister introduced and mentioned no fear in coming to Ottawa, and uses the term peaceful assembly, which comes right out of the Charter. And like I said, those rights virtually mean nothing when the Emergencies Act is in place. So I'm going to talk about ignorance with Dana here. At the very least, it's ignorance. Now, somebody asked about CPS coming and visiting. That might be ignorance on their part. CPS is Child Protective Services, which is the American counterpart. We have CAS, Children's Aid Society in Canada. So, when asked about them coming and visiting, Dana says that they're not a threat, and in her words, nor is it a bad thing for us to have them out at the Peaceful Freedom Rally. And when asked about them coming and visiting, she said that they haven't, but in her words, is it going to happen? Well, that depends on the kindness and compassion of our government and the kindness and compassion of our police force to follow through on the crimes of our government. I'm sure one crown corporation and another crown corporation will simultaneously work together in order to make your life a living hell, putting it mildly considering the topic. For preparation, if they show up, she also goes on to mention hotels, families, nannies, and all sorts of child care development people on site. So, for one thing, I'm going to give my practical advice to you now. So, I would not suggest bringing your children to the Convoy if you ever want to see them again, for the simple fact that there is automatic labeling of domestic terrorism, and blockades can be taken as an act of war, regardless of the intentions of people on the ground. Being that I know people's hearts are in the right place, but their minds are not, unfortunately. The political narrative is that they're domestic terrorists there. So, all in all, you are asking to have your children taken away by bringing them there. I'm sorry. So, I'm going to give you some practical advice now in order to deal with CAS on a level aside from the Convoy now. So, if CAS shows up, you give no association, and you have freedom of association under the Charter. So, the only language they speak is legalese, so you directly tell them you have no right to administer my property without my consent. If they try and talk to your child, you say, You have no right to administer my property without my consent. Yes, the court system looks at your children as property, but you have to speak their language, play their game in order to keep your children safe. If they touch your child, you will raid and police help. It's easier said than done, but stay calm and record it, because if you get apprehended, they will use that as an excuse to take your child away. So what you do next is you ask to see a warrant, ask for ID and badges of any and all involved, then you call local police and file kidnapping charges and an emergency injunction. Never identify yourself to caseworkers and never speak to them more than I suggested, and you keep your child in arm's reach, because they will try and make something out of nothing in order to take your child away. So, next up, somebody asks them to comment that somebody can get arrested if they remain at the convoy, and Dana uses that as an opportunity to promote her legal team, and Roy mentions Keith Wilson said that peaceful assembly is permitted but horns are not. So I've already went over my thoughts on that. So looking at the TBOF's board, Taking Back Our Freedoms, we have Brian Peckford, who I mentioned, and he's the last living First Minister who signed the Constitution of Canada to include the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Sitting on this board, we have Maxime Bernier, who I've spoken mountains about. We have Byron Bridle. Oh, look, it's Daniel Bulford. And we'll probably recognize other notable names and faces here as well. So this is an interesting video posted by The Lion Canada, because Danny Bulford is suggesting that firearms that were stolen in Peterborough, Ontario on Sunday morning, which is February 13th, 2022, and hindsight looking at it, that they may have been planted at the Ottawa protest. And in his words, our sources have notified us that these weapons may be planted by nefarious elements, and at this point, we have no further knowledge who is behind this act of sabotage. So he claims to have notified authorities and is collaborating with them, the Ottawa Police, OPP, RCMP, and Parliamentary Protective Service. And the last thing he says is, we expressly affirm the principle that change can only occur within the democratic process. So I've already told you that your charter rights are being stripped, and again, we're moving our way to that, and not like the charter really meant anything to us anyway. So in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about Conrad Lamottelaine here, and I apologize if I mispronounce his name, because he is a former mayor in Castleman, Ontario, and that's a predominantly French town. Now, Conrad ended up reaching out to Pat King, and Conrad is apparently a notable Freemason. That's what Pat King said in the video anyway. And the letter says, the Conservatives made a request to Pat King to clear the borders and their rights. That's what it said. And the letter also states that the government had a special meeting with the province and the weekend will turn ugly. In the letter given to Pat, it mentions that the people need a new government, and it would be named the National Party or the Canadian Party. And to quote here, form a party and you can be the next Prime Minister. Okay, I don't know really whether to take this seriously or not, frankly, but I thought it was worthy to include, because Conrad is a fairly well-connected individual, as I'm going to show by this photo. So here's a younger Conrad, and here we have former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, and then we have Brian Mulroney. I'm not 100% sure who this person is, but I'll tell you, it looks like someone named Norman Inkster, who's former RCMP commissioner during the Brian Mulroney era, and he also sat on the board of Interpol as well. Alright, so now I'm going to move on to talking about the Emergencies Act. And it came into law in 1988, and it is a federal law that can be used by the federal government in the event of a national emergency. And just for tiny bit of historical context here, it replaced the War Measures Act, and the War Measures Act was used in World War I, II, and the October Crisis in 1970. So the Act contains a specific definition of national emergency that makes clear how serious a situation needs to be before the Act can be relied upon. A national emergency is an urgent, temporary, and critical situation that seriously endangers the health and safety of Canadians, or that seriously threatens the ability of the Government of Canada to preserve the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Canada. It must be a situation that cannot be effectively dealt with by the provinces and territories by any other law of Canada. So as I was talking about the labeling of domestic terrorism, it's easy for the Government of Canada to actually skew things their way. And as well, I want to talk about the Charter in relation to this here, because the Charter allows the government to balance the rights of the individual with the interests of society, where limits on guaranteed rights and freedoms can be justified in a free and democratic society. So that's basically said in Section 1 of the Charter, which in short puts limits on your rights and freedoms that are guaranteed in the Charter. I use the word guaranteed with heavy air quotes, by the way. And these limits are set out in law, pursue an important goal which can be justified in a free and democratic society, and to pursue the goal in a reasonable and proportionate manner. So being that this also feeds into the shortage, into the supply shortage, that is something that they will most definitely use against the truckers, but I don't think anybody should have to go along with these tyrannical mandates, and by all means, at the very least, you should strike and not do a job that actually requires you to take poison. Alright, so moving forward. The Honorable David Lamottelaine. So today is February 15th, 2022 is the date of this. Today's date is February 18th as I record this. The Honorable David Lamottelaine, Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, with the support of Honorable Marco Mendicino, apologies for the pronunciation, that's the Minister of Public Safety, and the Honorable Bill Blair, President of the Queen's Privy Council in Canada, and Minister of Emergency Preparedness, announced the declaration of a public order emergency under the Emergencies Act to end disruptions, border blockades, and the occupation of Ottawa's downtown core. Now, when a declaration of a public emergency is made under the Emergencies Act, it allows the federal government to make orders and regulations that it believes are necessary for dealing with the emergency on reasonable and proportionable grounds. I'm just going to go over some of the stuff that Chrystia Freeland has to say here. She mentions, and there's only really two sections of the video at about 9 minutes and 26 seconds and about 24 minutes and 38 seconds. Each of those are about a minute long and worth hearing for yourself, not the entirety of the video. Now, 9 minutes and 26 seconds, Chrystia Freeland's Canadians, she's our finance minister in Canada, and she mentions that a bank or other financial service provider will be able to freeze or suspend an account without a court order. And she also says federal government institutions will have a new broad authority to share relevant info with banks and other financial service providers to stop funding of illegal blockades. She warns of corporate accounts being frozen if trucks are used in the blockade, and insurance on the vehicle will be suspended. And the second time she speaks of 24 minutes and 38 seconds, she says, she mentions broadening Canada's anti-money laundering and terrorist financing rules so that they can cover crowdfunding platforms and the payment service providers that they use. And this covers all forms of transactions, including digital assets such as cryptocurrencies. Now, this is the Emergency Economic Measures Order. And for context, I'm not going to read everything to you, but I have to read what an entity is. And that includes a corporation, trust, partnership, fund, unit, corporated, association, or organization, or foreign state. Now I'm going to read you the relevant sections here. And in section 4.2, when it says the center, it's referring to FINTRAC, which is Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Center of Canada. So those entities must also report to the center, FINTRAC, every financial transaction that occurs or that is attempted in the course of their activities and in respect of which there are reasonable grounds to suspect that A, the transaction is related to the commission or the attempted commission of a money laundering offense by a designated person, or the transaction is related to the commission or the attempted commission of a terrorist activity financing offense by a designated person. Alright? And then moving over to section 5, the duty to disclose. Now, every entity set out in section 3 must disclose without delay to the commissioner of the RCMP or the director of CSIS the existence of property in their possession or control that they have reason to believe is owned, held, or controlled by or on behalf of a designated person, and B, any information about a transaction or proposed transaction in respect of property referred to in paragraph A. I'm only going to read sections 6 and 7, and then I'm going to change the tab. A government of Canada, provincial, or territorial institution may disclose information to any entity set out in section 3 if the disclosing institution is satisfied that the disclosure will contribute to the application of this order. And immunity, no proceedings under the Emergencies Act and no civil proceedings lie against an entity for complying with this order. So that spells out virtually everything Chrystia Freeland was saying. So a total of 34 cryptocurrency wallets allegedly associated with the Canadian truckers protesting COVID-19 restrictions, which had been raising money with Bitcoin for the Freedom Convoy 2022 campaign, have reportedly been blocked. And in particular, the RCMP issued an order requiring FINTRAC-related organizations in Canada to stop interacting with 34 crypto wallets, according to the counter signal. The wallets are alleged to be associated with the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa. The counter signal has confirmed at least one wallet which had contained over $1 million worth of Bitcoin as being a part of the Honk Honk HODL campaign to support truckers via cryptocurrency. That's Tallycoin, which I showed in my previous video. So there's this guy, Chris Barber. He ends up getting arrested, and when he does, he says, "Get her on camera, boys. Light her up." And he doesn't appear really worried whatsoever, which is somewhat interesting. And then this one here, Tamara Leach, when she gets arrested, what happens in the situation is a police officer goes up to Tamara and asks her to step aside politely, and she does so, and they exchange a little bit of dialogue, and I can't really hear what they're saying, and she willingly puts her hand behind her back and gets cuffed, but what's weird is she doesn't even ask what the hell she's being charged with. Like, wouldn't that be the first question you'd ask? What am I being charged with? Why am I being arrested? What's going on? And Daniel Bulford is present and says to the police, "You gotta take me too," but this kind of smells an obvious setup. And as well, I've got reports from earlier today that apparently Daniel Bulford was arrested as well, and I don't know that for sure. So if someone can confirm Daniel Bulford's arrest for me in the comments, that would be greatly appreciated. Because like I said, information is changing by the hour and by the day. And with due respect, I can't do this without anybody's help and support. And I also want to be clear that I don't have a personal vendetta against the PPC, Maxime Bernier, or any of these supposed convoy organizers, or anybody whose hearts are even in the right place. I just want to give practical advice, and I want people to be in truth. I want people to be in their truth, and I want people to be viewing things objectively. I can't change the world. I can't change the way people think, but I know that the truth will set you free. And I just want to say thanks again to everybody who's been conversing with me in the comments, and as well any of my supporters. I love everyone. I love you guys. I just want to say that as well. So now that that's awkward and in the air, take care of yourselves, and thanks for watching.